I really appreciate you all taking the time out for this. We're going to discuss a topic that's very close to my heart, and that is naughty or neurodivergent. How do you know? And how we're going to unpack these behaviors using positive psychology. So I want to start with some statistics that came out last year, and that's saying that 1 in 5 children and young people in England aged 8 to 25 had a probable mental disorder in 2023. Now, actually, we don't really know the figures. These are only the figures that we acquire. They're not actually necessarily the reality of the situation. Who haven't been diagnosed, who haven't gone through the process, who are suffering in silence. So I want to talk a little bit more about that later, but that's just really to set the scene. And today we're going to cover very broadly and very briefly really what drives human behavior, so you can get a foundational understanding of that. Also, what the differences are in perhaps the neurodivergent brain, and looking at some existing processes that are working fairly well, such as positive reinforcement, and looking at different models such as self-determination theory and motivation. And then I'm going to discuss a new perspective for supporting young people and teenagers. So very, very briefly, the way the world exists for many of us depends on how we view the world, on our own perspective. So if we go for a walk, what I see will be completely different to, let's say, the person walking beside me. And that is because we all have a makeup in our brain born from our experiences. And again, very, very briefly, how we live on a daily basis depends on what we're putting into our minds and our bodies. Probably around 5 to 15% of us at any given time are consciously aware. That means we're making judged decisions, we're learning, we're getting excited, we're living in the present. But almost 85 to 95% of us are living in a process of automated responses. And that is, we're thinking the same way as we thought the day before. We're using processes from our past experiences to decipher what's in front of us. I just want you to keep that in mind, that we often use our previous experiences, our past makeup to make judgments and decisions on a daily basis. But what we do share in common is an automated process that happens in our body, which is often referred to as the cognitive cycle, thoughts, feeling, behavior cycle. It's used often in cognitive behavioral therapy and NLP, for instance. And the premise is that all our behaviors are influenced by our thoughts and our feelings. So they're reactive. For every thought that we have an associated feeling. That could be positive, negative, or neutral. And for every behavior that we have, there's usually a series of thoughts and feelings that go with that. Now, sometimes in relation to children, we might often see behavior in that child, but we don't see what's driving the behavior. We don't know the thoughts and the feelings that are happening before that behavior. So we as a parent or an adult or an educator might fill in those thoughts and feelings. So they're feeling sad, or they're distracted, or they're not thinking of the work that's in front of them. So we will kind of fill in those gaps. But if you think about ourselves, when you might be going about your day and you respond to somebody says something to you, and you might respond in a way that you might be raising your voice. And this might be usually within family members who we feel much more comfortable with. But we respond in a way that we think, oh, that was a bit sharp. But what we haven't really appreciated is the thoughts and feelings that was driving those behaviors. So it might be that they've hit a raw nerve because something previously happened, or you've done something, or you're meaning to do something and you didn't get it done, and that's irritating, and then you've snapped. So I just want you to remember that how we behave and the context of our behaviors is driven by a process that perhaps is quite automated and subconscious. So we're not always aware of that. So on top of that, when we're talking about the adult and the child, there's a lot of differences in the brain between an adult and a child. So the child brain is a little bit smaller, hasn't developed, but also they don't have the experiences. So if you think about an adult brain, probably from the ages of 27 upwards, we're looking at an adult having quite a lot of experiences. Some will be positive experiences, some will be traumatic, some will be neutral. You'll have experiences from how you grew up, the parents you had, the education you had, your friendships, any relationships you've had, all of these things that are shaping your experiences. And that's what's shaping your thinking. The child doesn't necessarily have this. So they are very much more living in the present. But if you add then the neurodivergent brain, it adds a whole layer of differences. So the neurodivergent brain can be a little bit more complicated. There's a lot of studies that are suggesting certain areas of the neurodivergent brain are smaller, particularly in the prefrontal cortex. It's the bit at the front. That's responsible for behaviors, regulations, emotional regulation, and particularly also in the gray matter. So that's the lining of the brain. And I don't want to get too super technical, and I'm not a neuroscientist, but I know from studies that this gray matter, which is also has lots of the cell bodies in it, and I've put a quote here saying the cell bodies for most cognitive and emotional functions reside in the gray matter. So the gray matter is essential for all aspects of human behavior. The gray matter appears to be less in a lot of neurodivergent brains, and that's in dyslexia, dyspraxia, in ADHD, and in autism spectrum disorder. But the gray matter is also less in anxiety disorders. There's a really great paper that's recently out saying that conduct disorder also shows a reduction in gray matter. So with this in mind, when we see a child that's misbehaving, do you actually know whether they're being naughty or neurodivergent? And this is potentially quite controversial, because if we look at the neurodivergent mind, yes, you've got the differences in gray matter, you've got the differences perhaps in the smaller prefrontal cortex, hippocampus areas, and also naughty behavior doesn't last in the same way as neurodivergent behavior lasts. So the neurodivergent behavior tends to be a bit more repetitive, happens in various different settings, not just in one settings. But the measurement for neurodivergent disorders, and I'm going to call it disorder, whether I agree with that or not, because that's what it's named as, has a set of measures around it. So let's take ADHD, for instance, which is measured by a number of different ways, but commonly as the DSM-5. And if you score 6 out of the 9 criteria for inattentive, or 6 out of the 9 for hyperactivity, or 12 out of the 19 for combined type ADHD, well, is the person who's scoring 12 markers out of the 19 the same as someone who's scoring 18 markers out of the 19? And I just want to let that sit with you. ADHD is not a spectrum in the same way as autism spectrum disorder, but it's not only about labeling these disorders, but I want you to consider, if we only see what we think we can see, and remember that's with the adult brain and the brain that has their own experiences, how can we know what we think we know? And I said this the other day, and I go, we need to rethink how we're viewing mental health. We need to rethink how we're supporting our young people. And we need to rethink how we're labeling them. And I know science has a very, very important role in all of this, but we're not scientists. We're teachers, we're educators, we are parents. We're not scientists, and we do not have the manuals and all the evidence beside us. And even if we did, I'm doing a doctorate at the moment, and even if we do, half of it is very hard to understand. So I'm going to try and distill some of it in a moment for you. So for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Zena Hicks. I am a positive psychologist and an accredited coach. I've also written a book called 28 Days of Positivity. I've used to be a perinatal educator and did lots of mindset work, etc., before becoming a positive psychologist. Most importantly, I have 2 boys who are neurodivergent. And when I'm in neurodivergent, they both got dyslexia, they both got ADHD. It's likely they both have autism spectrum disorder. One of them has opposition defiance disorder, and another one has pathological demand avoidance. So there's a lot of labels coming out. I stopped labeling after the ADHD. I said, we don't need to know if they're autistic or if they have autistic traits. How is it going to serve them well? And we have to look at these labels that we're giving our children, because when is it going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy? Now, I also have ADHD, and I often, when somebody says something to me, I take it as fact, which is really hard when you're doing a doctorate, because you go, oh, how can I decipher who's telling the truth or what I believe in? If you're telling a child they have something and you're not giving them the context of what that is, it can be quite damaging. So are they naughty? Are they neurodivergent? Does it matter? And that's what I'd like to explore today. So there are some traits within, let's say, ADHD, such as low dopamine levels. And yes, that has been shown in lots of studies. But again, that's not something we can see. We can't see when their dopamine levels are low. But if we are starting to label them that they can't do this, or their behaviour isn't the same as other people, or they're not meeting those markers, they're going to start believing that they can't do things. And that's going to start a feeling of lack of control or disconnect, anger, sadness. They're going to maybe attention seek. It's going to cause anxiety, etc. And all of these things are chipping away at that grey matter that's trying to protect them and make them into fully functional human beings. Reward and punishment sensitivity, which is often found in some neurodivergent conditions, particularly with ADHD. So they feel more sensitive to being punished, and they're also very sensitive to rewards. And that reward, getting the reward, is lifting up their dopamine levels, which is fulfilling this apparent deficit. So positive reinforcement does really, really work with those children who have neurodivergent traits. But positive reinforcement also works with children who do not have neurodivergent traits. So should we be saying, oh, well, this child is neurodivergent, we know that, he's got a diagnosis, or she has the clear signs, we've got support, and we know what we're doing, so we're going to give them loads of positive reinforcement. If they're getting something that somebody else is not getting, they're going to feel different. And my younger son, and he was 11 at the time, he was really, really struggling with his ADHD. They suggested he go on medication. So we got the medication, came back, we know you're struggling at school, medication will help you. And he goes, why do I have to take this? I go, because of the ADHD, and this is going to help you regulate, and it's going to help you do this. And he goes, why am I taking a tablet if there's nothing wrong with me? And that very phrase really stuck in my mind, because we're treating the children as if there's something wrong with them, as if who they are is not fitting the mold of society. He didn't take the medication, and he won't take any medication, even if he's really poorly, because he goes, no, I can handle this. I said to him, how's it going in school? Are they aware of your additional needs? And he goes, if anybody comes to me and asks me again during the day, am I okay? Or how am I doing? I'm going to punch them. I go, please don't punch them. Please don't punch them. And he goes, why do I have to be put aside and made different just because I do things differently? Why can't, if somebody needs help in maths and they've got all these tools, why do they just get the tools? Why doesn't everybody get the tools? And I'm like, wow, okay, very, very profound. And you can only really understand this through their mind. I've got the adult mind. I've got all this way I was brought up and educated. He's got his mind, and he knows what he wants. So there's so much to learn from this. How do we actually know what these children are thinking, what they're feeling? With positive reinforcement, interesting about ADHD, they say that by the time a child is 12 years of age, they are likely to have received 20,000 negative or corrective comments, and that's just at school. So what are we doing to protect these children? There's some research that suggests using positive statements, positive reinforcement, So more positive statements, at least 3 to 5 times more than one negative statement. But is that enough? So I'm proposing to you a new perspective. I'm proposing to you, how can we become more curious? How can we really understand what's happening in the mind of each individual child and understanding what they need, not collectively, not what the whole class needs, or children, treating them in the same way. And anybody who is a parent, I'm pretty sure that none of you treat your children in the exact same way because they're different. So what can we do to understand what they need? And also asking yourself, what control do they have? So we get them up in the morning, we send them to school. They go into school, they take out their books, they are told what to do. They go on the playground. Oh, okay, they might have some control there unless they have other things and activities to do. And I know that we're bringing up our children. We need to guide them and nurture them. And absolutely, we do need to do that. But at any given time, are we giving them a choice? Are they in control of their lives, their little lives? And when we point out their differences, we're now taking away some of their control by saying, that's not quite fitting into the norm of society. When we're asking them to do things, which obviously we do need to do, are we saying it in a very, very clear way? Not that we understand, but that the child understands. And a really great tool is when you ask a child to do something or an expectation, is get them to repeat back what you've asked them to do. And often I get the answer, and so what did you say? I go, oh my gosh, okay. But when they repeat back, and sometimes it might take a few times, then they get the understanding of what the adult is trying to say. Now, whether they see this request in the same way is completely different. But is there a clear pathway? Are you being very, very clear on what you're saying? And how can they feel accomplished? So if they're good at maths, if they're good at sports, if they're good at academics, if they're good at drawing or dancing or anything, that's great. But what if they're not good at any of those traditional things? How can they feel accomplished? And also importantly, who is going to show them support and interest and reward? And if we're working parents or if we're in the classroom, we've got busy class, we're not going to necessarily have time to give support interest 24/7 in the day. There's a theory called self-determination theory. I was looking at some papers recently and it looked at how self-determination theory and having our psychological needs met. And this isn't just for children, it's for adults and children. If we have our psychological needs met, we tend to have thicker grey brain matter. And what we need to psychologically feel secure and our needs met is autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And ultimately, that is being in control of our life and our decisions, being good at stuff, and also feeling connected to and cared for by other people. Now, if you just take ADHD or even ASD as a guide there, in control of their own life and decisions? Nah. Competent? Some children who are doing incredibly well. My youngest is actually very academically sound, but he'll always be marked and judged against other people. So do they have the competence? And also as a parent raising neurodivergent children, terrified things would happen, or they weren't in control, or they didn't have the same regulation. So I would fit that regulation for them. And connectedness. Now, again, with ASD, ADHD, you don't really have the same friendship groups broadly. Some do. So maybe you're lacking that kind of friendship group and that connectedness. And when you get that connectedness, it might be for different reasons, not because they want to be with you, because there's something wrong with you. So this is a very, very new psychological model that I've been working with. It's called the Extended Evolutionary Metamodel. And I won't go into the whole academic side of things, but ultimately it is a picture drawn from psychology, drawn from therapy and counselling, to understand what is actually in a person's control to change. So you can control and change your beliefs and values, your thoughts and perceptions, feelings, emotions, your areas of focus, the inner motivation that you have, and behaviours and actions. And motivation sometimes is quite dramatically missing in those children who are neurodivergent. If they can change all these, do you think that children are aware that they can change all of these? Or do they only get the opportunity to share what they can change when they are diagnosed, given medication, and or sent into therapy? So when they go into therapy or counselling, they understand what's wrong. So here's what's wrong. I'm proposing a new direction for this, and that is a coaching psychology process. And I also work in executive coaching, and so much of executive coaching could be used in the classroom, it could be used in parenting. We're looking at through coaching psychology. So that's training, mentoring these young people to understand psychology, understand what's happening in their brain, understanding what they're in control of, giving them control, building up their self-determination, building up their motivation to what is strong with them individually, what they're good at. And I'm proposing that we enable them, not label them. And coaching psychology brings in some of the amazing traits of positive psychology. And positive psychology isn't only about everything's wonderful and great and everything's positive. We acknowledge that the human experience has some kind of unnice things sometimes. But what we're trying to do is build up that positive, 3 to 5 positive to 1 negative, build up that reservoir of what's great so we can cope with those darker times. And positive psychology gives us a tool to be able to personalize what's right for each individual child and increase awareness and identify and understand their emotions. Yeah, I've shouted at somebody, but why did I shout at them? Because there's always a why. And helping them reframe the narrative. Yeah, well, I still don't like them, but I know that that's made me feel even sadder by shouting at them. Recognizing their strengths. Yeah, I mightn't be good at maths, but I am amazing at drawing, dancing, team building, empowered decision making. So that's giving them choice and giving them goals, and not the goals we give them at school. Not saying, oh, let's work to a C or a B in English this term. It's like, what do you want to work for? How is English going to help you? And sometimes the young people, when they're at school, they don't know why they're there and they don't know how it's serving them. Why do I need to learn geography? Why do I need to learn history? Why do I need to learn maths? But if we can show them why that might be good in their life, they might be more connected to it. Building on that growth mindset, and most importantly, helping them understand, self-kindness and self-compassion, which is if somebody else isn't treating them kindly, you might find the children don't treat themselves kindly. And it's building that from the inside. So I'm just going to, and I didn't mean for this presentation to be coming into a social justice piece. It's more about helping you think maybe I'm perceiving things a little bit differently, but I feel it's time to change the trajectory of poor mental health outcomes in kids and stop pathologizing differences or non-conforming or misunderstood behaviors. We know that the current methods are not working. Well-being has exponentially risen in the last decade and a half, but so have mental health issues. Why? Is it because of awareness? Is it because of the language we're using? Or is it we're not really enabling them and giving them the life skills that they need to do? And I'm just proposing that coaching psychology is offering an evidence-based alternative solution. I'm just going to give you a brief overview of what we do at Positive Education, using a positive psychology approach to change the way we are working with children. And that's using positive psychology and coaching models and executive coaching to give them the tools that they need to be able to fulfill their psychological needs and understand the changes that they can make. And we work in schools. We have resident coaches in schools that come in the same as a peripatetic teacher who does music. They go in and they help that child work to what they want to work. And they don't have to be broken or they don't have to be neurodivergent. It's just what they want to work with. And we also work with groups of children, educators. We do inset days. We work in the schools to upskill and train the trainer. So teaching the teachers to become coaches. And we also do the same for parents, one-to-one coaching on their own or in conjunction with a program for their child. And also we have memberships where they can upskill, so then they become the coach. And when I started doing positive psychology, I was so passionate about not making positive psychology another really expensive thing for people to access, which is why I do a lot of free training and webinars and workshops and have a lot of stuff online about it. Because you, as the parent, as the teacher, have the tools inside of you or can get access to these tools, these positive psychology interventions to be able to use. And not one size is going to fit everybody. So you have to try things. It's a process-based approach. So you can try different things. And one of the most simplest positive psychology interventions is gratitude. And that has a lot of research around it, particularly around the brain and the changes that happen in the brain. And it's seeing for ourselves what we can be grateful for and seeing the good, seeing the 5 positives rather than the 1 negative. So gratitude, a simple exercise for you to do, and for yourself as well first, because if our own psychological needs aren't met as parents or as educators, then it's going to be harder for us to help coach another individual in the same way. So gratitude, 3 things that you're grateful for, and why. Why are you grateful for them? How do they make you feel? That's tapping into your cognitive cycle, thoughts, feelings, behaviors. This is what I'm grateful for. How is it making me feel? And move on with that. But just wanted to share some of the things that our young people say about coaching. I know how to control my anger better now. I control myself before I speak, and I think about what I'm going to do. It's really helpful and useful. It's making such a huge difference. And even with teachers and parents looking at this, not from a therapy perspective, but from a coaching perspective. And just talking about parenting courses and how the coaching model is by far the most helpful, relevant, and fascinating. It's a small practical steps, and that's really important. Things that I can come out of this conversation with and practically do that helps me feel that I'm evolving not only as a parent or but also with those around me. So I just want to invite you to book a discovery call if you're interested in learning more about this. It's obviously there's no obligation to it. I only have a few spaces over this coming week, but by all means, please, whether you're a parent, whether you're worried about child, whether you want to just do something different, a different approach for your child, or an educator, please just get in touch with me. I'm going to also put it in the chat in a moment, but I'm going to open it up to questions. So if you have any questions, let's open up the discussion. I'm just going to stop my share now so we can engage in that.